Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. It comes as no surprise that women flex their formidable muscles when needed most, representing a disproportionate number of essential workers during the darkest days of the coronavirus global outbreak and leading the charge against racism in the United States. And abroad, it was female national leaders who reined in infection and death rates in their countries to the lowest levels worldwide. My guest this week on Vox Novus, Gloria Feldt, the practical activist, says it is women who will turn our world around using intentioning and accomplish this by 2025. Gloria Feldt is a New York Times best-selling author, speaker, commentator, and feminist leader who has gained national recognition as a social and political advocate for women's rights. In 2013, she co-founded Take the Lead, a nonprofit initiative with a goal to propel women to leadership parity by 2025. She's a former CEO and president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, directing the organization from 1996 to 2005. She's been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Forbes, Time, NBC, Fast Company, Vanity Fair, and much more. Her website is gloriafeldt.com, and she joins me this week to share her practivism and new book, Intentioning: Sex, Power, Pandemics, and How Women Will Take the Lead for Everyone's Good. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus, Gloria Feldt. Welcome, Gloria.
Hi, Victor. Thanks for having me.
Please share with our listeners your path and the challenges you faced.
Let's see, how long do we have?
It's your show.
It's been a long and winding road, as the song says. My path has definitely not been one that it's so funny that I'm writing a book about intention, because I did not intend the path that I have taken, but by saying yes to what was on the path, I've had a pretty good one. I grew up in rural Texas and small towns. And if anybody's familiar with the Larry McMurtry book or movie, The Last Picture Show, I went to high school in a town just like that, and very close to it, very close to the one he wrote about, as a matter of fact, and married my high school sweetheart. We moved off to the land of Friday Night Lights in Odessa, Texas. And again, that's for real. It's not made up. It's not fiction. And my kids all graduated from Birmingham High School. And I really bought the cultural Kool-Aid, I guess you would say, that a woman's role was to marry young, have a lot of children, be the support system for everybody else. She might go to college, but not to have a career particularly, or if you had a career, there were just several that were the appropriate careers for women. I saw myself, and I actually love teaching. And so I saw myself, if I were ever going to have a career, as being a teacher. And so my third child, my son, was born just a few days after my 20th birthday. And all of a sudden I had a wake-up call. It was like, oh my goodness, what if I had to support these children? I had no employable skills. I didn't have, I hadn't had any thought about what to do with my own life. And I'd always been a good student. I'd always been made good grades. I liked school. So I started to the community college, which was all there was in Odessa at the time. And it took me 12 years to finally get my bachelor's degree, but it was a good opportunity for me to get involved in community service work, which I did for several years. And one of the things I did was to volunteer for Head Start, which was a new program at the time. And I was then offered a job teaching at Head Start. So I did that for 5 years. And I when the University of Texas opened a branch, I was the first one in the door and determined to be the first one finished. So I did my last 2 years in 1 year. And as I was taking the very last course, I took an ecology course because that seemed like the easiest science course one could take. And I decided I would do a paper on the new little Planned Parenthood affiliate in West Texas because one of my friends had introduced me to it. Well, actually, one of my co-teachers at Head Start had introduced me to it. And I interviewed the executive director. That was it. I talked to a couple of other people, a nurse practitioner, a board member. I wrote my paper. That was the end of that. As far as I was concerned, I was planning to be a high school social studies teacher for the rest of my life. And 2 weeks after I did that interview with the executive director, who I'd never met before, she called me and she said, I'm leaving. I think you should submit a resume. And I thought to myself, well, I've never had a formal job interview before. The jobs they just had been happenstance, and I never had a resume. So it would be a good idea to put one together. I'm going to have to be finding a teaching job soon after I do my student teaching this fall. And so I am in no danger of being hired, but I think I'll go ahead and submit my resume, which I did. And after 2 interviews, as they say, the rest is history. I was offered the position of the executive director of this new Planned Parenthood affiliate in West Texas. And 30 years later, I retired as the national president. So you never know where life is going to take you if you say yes. And after 30 years, that seemed like a good round number. And my plan was to do what I had wanted to do since I was 5 years old, which was to become a writer. I don't know why I was so fascinated with writers and writing, but somehow I would carry my little notebook around and write stories and report on things that were happening. And I'm sorry that I didn't keep those notebooks because I think they would be very fascinating for me to look at now, but I didn't. I thought, well, if I'm ever going to try to write some books, I had better do that now. I had already written a couple of books while I was still with Planned Parenthood, and one of which is quite relevant, which we'll probably talk about in a few moments. But I wrote a couple of other books. I wrote a book with Kathleen Turner, the actress, about her life. And that was a good, fun thing to do for a year while I was trying to decide what was the next third of my life going to be. But I knew that wasn't the kind of book that I wanted to do forever. So I had, about that time, Elle magazine asked me to write an article on women running for office in 2008, at the time when it seemed like we were going to have our first woman president the first time. If you remember that, there will probably be people listening in who remember that moment. And we thought it was going to be a nice piece on how women have a role model now. And so lots of more women will be running for office and the world will get better. Well, as it turns out, the story was women weren't running for office. They were half as likely as men ever to even think about it. They were the 18% of Congress at the time. And as it turns out, they were also 18% of the top leadership in every single sector: corporate, profession, nonprofit, in the upper echelons, you name it. Even if women were the majority of workers, they were not in the top leadership. And I was stunned. I was shocked. I was like, what is going on? I have to figure out why. So I did a good bit of research. I ended up writing a book called No Excuses: 9 Ways Women Can Change How We Think About Power. And in it, I showed how women had been socialized differently from men about power. And that was why, in my mind, women would stop themselves from attaining power. And I came up with a way to help women break through that, which was to literally change our thinking about power from the old oppressive idea of power as being the power over you, which has been the narrative of history, fighting and wars, and the presumption that resources are scarce and the pie is finite. So I can't, if I take a piece, there's less for you. So we have to fight over our crumbs. Well, the fact is that power is unlimited, that It is what you make out of it. It's like a hammer. You can build something with it, or you can break something apart. And if you start to think about it as being the power to innovate, create, make life better for your family, your company, your community, the world, all of a sudden I would see women go, well, I want that kind of power. What do I do to get that? And so I built a whole program around helping women to embrace their power with authenticity and confidence and joy. And I included in this book 9 leadership power tools to help them have the actual skills they needed to thrive in the world as it is while they changed it. People started asking me to teach workshops using it. And I, being a teacher at heart, thought, well, that would be kind of fun. And I started seeing women have these amazing breakthroughs, and I'd hear from them after a month or 6 months or a year that they had used those new power concepts and the leadership power tools, and they had succeeded in their career to their wildest imagination. They had earned more money. They had asked for it and earned more. They were closing their own pay gap and helping their daughters do the same. And so, I was pretty soon seduced into thinking, well, maybe we better have an organization here then, because I could teach some workshops, but if I wanted to have real change in the world, I would have to have an organization. That's how Take the Lead came to be. Was developed. The program for it was developed in 2013. We had a formal or a public launch event in 2014, and it was just phenomenal. Filled a 3,000 seat auditorium without even trying, and live streamed it to about 500,000 people around the world. So I knew we were doing the right thing at the right time, but we weren't really ready with the ability to scale up our programs at that point. So since then, that's what we've been doing. We've been developing more programs, scaling them up, testing them out, having a validation from external evaluators that indeed that process does impact greatly. Something like 40% of women who go through the program have attained higher leadership roles within 6 months. And that was pretty phenomenal. So then there's after I work with women on that for these last several years, 8 or 9 years, what I realized was that, wait, there's the next question. And the next question is the power to what? How do you identify what you want to have as your legacy in this world? How do you identify what your true purpose is in this world? How do you have what you need to attain that, not just have the ambition for it, but to actually make the intention happen? So that's the basis of my latest book, which is called Intentioning: Sex, Power, Pandemics, and How Women Will Take the Lead for Everyone's Good. Of course, I started writing that book before the pandemic. And when the coronavirus pandemic was raging, I was in the middle of working on it. And then, of course, came the second pandemic of the racial reckoning that was long overdue. And both of those had a big impact on the economics of our society. So I really had to analyze all of those things and include that as context for this new book, Intentioning. And so there we are. I did that. I dealt with the importance of racial equity as well as gender equity and how important they are to go forward together, how companies can be more effective with their diversity programs. And I also did an analysis that led me to state clearly that leading like a woman is a good thing and actually is our superpower now. So then that book has 9 leadership intentioning tools and will become another course and more education that we can do for
and
women.
We're going to touch upon that momentarily. I just want to say you and I have something in common. The word retirement is not part of our vocabulary.
That's right. It just didn't work out for me. I did have an idea that I would semi-retire. that I could write books and I could maybe make a speech here and there, but mostly I would just play and have fun and enjoy the family. And I get to do a lot of that. But no, I'm with you. It's not for me.
What's the word? Anathema?
And maybe that's a good word. I like that word.
We're all familiar with the word intention, but the title of your new book contains a verb form of this word that I have not found in the dictionary, intentioning. What inspired this?
Well, my intention is that within a year it will be in the dictionary, but we will see. I aim for it to become the word of the year next year. So let's see if we can make that happen. If we hashtag it enough, maybe it will. First of all, I'll distinguish between ambition and intention. And that ambition, which, by the way, many of the studies say women have less of than men, but I did not believe, and women don't believe that either. It's more like, for example, a man will run for office just because, maybe for the power of it or whatever, or he'll just decide, well, I'm going to run, and he won't question whether he's qualified. A woman, on the other hand, will run if she sees an injustice that needs to be rectified, especially if it has to do with her children, and if there's a purpose behind it, and if people ask her to run. So there is that difference in socialization that does impact everything that we do. So I needed something. I needed a word that expressed something more than ambition. And intention, being a noun, well, it sort of just sits there. It doesn't have legs on it. So I created the verb form, an active verb form, using the terminology intentioning to signify, this isn't I wish, I want, I hope, I dream. Intentioning is I am, I will, I see it happening already. I know it will happen. That's it.
And there's an expression that says energy flows where intention goes.
I love that. I'll use it.
So in essence, what we're talking about, rather than being ambitious, because ambitious doesn't really imply activity. It doesn't imply intentional action. You say intentioning. That's the reason why you're using that word.
Exactly. Ambition is important because ambition can give us the fuel, the passion. But intentioning is the action. And one of the things that I do in the book is I provide a framework for intentions, for making your intent, for doing the intentioning that you want to do. And it's VCA as an acronym: vision, courage, action. Sometimes action has to precede courage. Sometimes you have to start doing something before you have the courage to do it. But you got to start with that vision that's rooted in not just in your ambition, but also in your sense of purpose, your sense of what really moves you. What are the values that you hold dear? What are the things that are so important to you? You have this vision that you need to bring to life in the world. But without the courage to believe you can accomplish that vision, and without taking the action of intentioning, the vision is more like a dream. And so vision, courage, action became my metaphor for intentioning.
And how do we develop that courage? How do women develop that courage to move forward?
I think that we all develop it by doing it. I think that we grow our courage muscles by using them and taking risks and being willing to sometimes fail and get ourselves, pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and keep moving forward. That requires some socialization, preferably at a younger age. And I think younger girls get more of this. I do think it's better with each generation, but girls still are socialized much more to think first about other people and to think about how they look to other people. And that puts the locus of power outside of you. In order to really elevate that intention, you have to take that power source inside, and you have to feel it inside of you and really know that you have the power to answer that question, the power to what, and that what is what my purpose is and what I am going to do with my life. And how do I want to show up in the world?
And that courage is also contingent on critical thinking of looking at all of the prospects, all of the possibilities, and what's the worst case scenario if it fails.
Yes. And even seeing the worst case scenario, not letting it daunt you.
Absolutely. You share that intentioning is a proactive process that builds leadership habits and filters out power demons. What are those, and how can you give us some examples, please?
Oh, the power demons. Yes, I realized that these are the things that set us back. These are the things that set us back, the things that keep us from going forward with what our intentions are, what we think our intentions are, that we can be set back. Everybody encounters pebbles in the road. I actually start the book by talking about how I tripped on a pebble while hiking in January of 2020, and I broke my wrist. And it made me remember one of my favorite leadership aphorisms, which is, it's not the mountains that trip you up, it's the pebbles on your path.
Absolutely.
As you can see those mountains, it's the pebbles that can really do you in. So those are the kinds of power demons. But just to give you an example, so I'm looking at leadership intentioning tool number 2, which is dream up. And I choose that one because we're talking so much about ambition versus intention, and really the meaning of intention and how you develop intention. And by the way, each one of these leadership intentioning tools is developed around the story of a woman who I interviewed, and I didn't make up the tools until I had interviewed quite a number of women, and that enabled those tools to formulate in my mind organically. So this Dream Up tool is largely it largely tells the story of an incredible concert pianist and composer named Maria Arsenievich. And she is, I'll tell you, during the pandemic that has set so many women back, Marina turned her house into a recording studio. And instead, she couldn't, all the performing venues, her entire performance schedule, of course, canceled. So she turned her house into a recording studio, a top-notch recording studio. She started videoing herself, recording her music. She wrote more music than she had ever written. So she's done more original music than ever. And she has amassed over 500,000 Instagram followers.
Wow.
And millions and millions of people now watch her music on YouTube. So that's, her dream up is, she is a composer and pianist, and no matter what happens in this world, that's what she's going to be doing. Absolutely. So even though she couldn't do it in the way she had been doing it before, but she could have been tripped up by some of these power demons, like, for example, feeding into distractions, because it would be easy to get up in the morning and say, well, I don't have an audience, so I can't perform for anyone. It would be easy to have negative thinking. So many of us suffered so much sadness and grief and depression. It's been really easy this last year and a half to have negative thinking that would deter us from whatever we're dreaming up.
My guest is Gloria Feldt. Her book is called Intentioning: Sex, Power, Pandemics, and How Women Will Take the Lead for Everyone's Good. Gloria, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Well, the wonderful thing is that the book can be obtained from your favorite bookseller, whether it's online or whether it's your neighborhood independent bookstore. I always encourage people to buy books from the independent bookstores in their towns and in their neighborhoods, because I love them. They're community centers. But you can also get it. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, wherever you get your books. You can get Intentioning. You can also go to my website, which is gloriafeldt.com. and you can click on the intentioning book page, and it will give you links where you can go to any of those booksellers and you can order the books there. And you can also download on my intentioning book page, you can also download a free workbook that I created to go along with the book, so that you have all of the exercises in the book put together into one very nice workbook. And with that, it will help you to utilize what you will learn by reading intentioning.
And we'll be back with more of Gloria after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Gloria Feldt. Her book is called Intentioning: Sex, Power, Pandemics, and How Women Will Take the Lead for Everyone's Good. Gloria, we started talking about the 9 leadership intentioning tools and practice exercises. What was the inspiration for these tools?
I am a very practical activist. And whenever I write, whether it's an article or a whole book, I always try to put into it actionable things that people can do, because I write books and I write articles that are committed to helping people achieve something. And that what it is they achieve might vary from book to book or article to article, but it's always my intentioning is always to help people have concrete skills and tools that they can apply right away, and that will be helpful to them in their daily lives. So that is, I don't know whether you'd call that the inspiration, or whether you'd call it the teacher in me that won't stop, or whether you'd call it simply, I want to be of use. I love to inspire people, and I will say humbly, not so humbly, that people do say when I speak, and I do make a lot of keynote speeches, they say that I've inspired them, and I love that. But I love it even better when I hear from them and they say, I used that tool, and this is what I accomplished.
There you go. You coined the term intentioning, and you said you're a practical activist. How about practivist?
Practivist. Oh, another one. Oh my goodness. That may have to be the next book. I don't know. What do you think, Victor?
Absolutely. There you go. Now, you divided these tools into 3 groups: self-definitional, counterintuitive, and systems change. Let's start with self-definitional. The first tool is uncover yourself. Please define this and offer an example.
Covering it's officially a psychological concept that is defined as when you are in any situation, whether it's in the workplace or some other part of society, you don't feel 100% like you measure up, or you don't feel 100% like you belong. You may cover. In other words, you may try to fit in. You may adapt your behavior because you want to fit in and not get criticized by whatever group you are covering for. Apparently, both men and women do cover to some extent in the workplace, but women cover a lot more than men, and people of color cover a lot more than white women do. And that will not surprise anybody, I think, who's listening, because the workplace as we know it was created by men for men 250, 300 years ago, when they had women at home who were taking care of the daily needs of the house and the family, or they had people of color who were doing that for them. So it's a concept that that is used by social psychologists and psychologists a lot to explain why we alter our behavior when we go into a place where our culture that we did not personally create and we don't feel comfortable there. If you think about when women were first entering the professional workplace, some people who are listening may remember this, and they may still have this suit in their closet with the big shoulder pads and a floppy tie. So we emulated the professional clothing of men. And now you don't see women doing that anymore because we're more comfortable in our own skins. We're more comfortable in the workplace. And to give you an example of myself, I mean, I grew up in these little Texas towns where my family was usually the only or one of very few Jewish families. And I wanted nothing more than to be like everybody else because my family was so not like everybody else. My grandparents all spoke with a thick accent. My mother went to work with my father. All the other children's mothers stayed at home and made cookies and wore starched aprons. And that was just not our household at all. And so I wanted to be like everybody else. And it took many years for me to understand that actually what sets you apart is what gets you ahead. So you should not only uncover yourself, but embrace what's different about you. And that is what will make you unique. That is what will give you particular skills. And in my case, I came to realize that having had the experience of being the other, as it were, is what gave me my passion for social justice. It's what gave me, it gave me the empathy for people who had not always had the power or the resources to be the predominant culture. So that's uncover yourself. And to me, I'm taking more time to explain that one because it's that important. I mean, that's where it has to start. And the best leaders know themselves really, really well, and they're willing to show themselves and who they are authentically to everyone.
Absolutely. The next one is Dream Up. We talked about that in the first segment. The third self-definitional tool is Believe in the Infinite Pie. Is there a piece for everyone?
There's more than a piece for everyone. We can always bake more pies. And I won't take a lot of time on this one because I talked about it when I talked about the transformation of the power concepts from power over to power to. And that's the basis of recognizing that there's no finite pie, that the more there is, the more there is. If I help you and you help me, we both have more. So let's do that.
The next set of leadership intention tools are the counterintuitive. Why counterintuitive? And please share some examples.
When we grow up, our mothers, I guess everything gets blamed on mothers, doesn't it? So maybe I should just say our parents and our teachers always tell us certain things that we shouldn't do. And it turns out when you are leading organizations or you're leading a movement or you're trying to get something done in your school or your community, that sometimes you need to behave in ways that are counterintuitive and that are not what you were told to do. And for example, there is a whole industry out there that is just making money hand over fist, selling women programs to make themselves more confident. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you're totally confident, you don't have any reason to try to get better. And if you wait until you're totally confident to do something, you may never get around to doing it. So I don't say that confidence is a bad thing, but I say that you need to modulate it and just, chill out a little bit. Because if you wait until you're totally confident, you may never try doing that thing that you so desperately think you want to do. If you want to turn it from ambition to intention, you have to modulate the confidence and just go ahead and do it anyway.
The last three leadership intentioning tools are the systems change. The first one you offer is be unreasonable. What does that mean and how does it empower?
Well, be unreasonable is a little bit like modulating confidence, or at least the theory of it is a little bit like, I quote George Bernard Shaw, and who said, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man expects the world to adapt to him. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. And I give him credit because he was kind of a feminist in his way, that I think he would include women in that statement if he were living today. But in principle, it's that, again, sort of like with confidence, if you just thought everything was fine in this world, and you didn't have a burr under your saddle that said, something needs to be changed. There is an injustice there that needs to be fixed. There is a product that needs to be developed to make life easier for someone. If you just thought everything was already fine, you wouldn't have any motivation whatsoever to make a better product or to make life better for you yourself or your neighbors or a whole group of people. So that's what Be Unreasonable is about. It's about, sometimes you have to break the rules in order to get where you want to go. Sometimes you have to break rules and make up a new set of rules. And that's how progress happens. And I think that that's particularly relevant right now, because in a time of these pandemics, this is a time of great disruption, but that disruption is also a time of rebirth. And it's up to us to see that opportunity in the disruption, to see the opportunity for rebirth, to be unreasonable enough to say, we can make this a better world. We can take this chaos and we can turn it on its head, and we can make things change as a result, because people have to think differently when the world is in chaos.
Amen. Amen. A woman. The second system change tool has to do with implicit bias. What is that, and how may we turn it around?
Women have been judged on so many factors, and very often we find that women feel they need to be perfect. And we know that women are judged differently than men for the tone of their voices, for example. We know that women are listened to less in meetings than men. We know that there is plenty of implicit bias. It's not that the men are deliberately trying, I think anyway. I don't think there's a deliberate effort to put women down, but it's like there are so many things that women have been judged on that, as it turn out to be our superpowers now. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We saw during the beginning of the pandemic how often countries that were led by women did a much better job of managing the pandemic than the countries led by men. And the reason is women are socialized, again, to think first about what other people are thinking about us. So we develop more empathy. We develop more collaboration, less ego in problem solving. And so that's what I mean, is it turns out that very socialization that creates implicit bias that has in the past seemed to paint women in a negative light, it's now what gives us our strength. It's the reasons why companies that have more women in their upper leadership are more profitable. Because when you haven't been in power, you have to know how to read the room. You have to have that empathy for other people. And that is what is going in our favor right now. So I say, let's use it.
Absolutely. The final system change tool is clang your cymbals. If you do this, will others march along with you?
Well, that's the idea. That's the intention of it. The leadership expert who is no longer with us. He died a few years ago, Warren Bennis. But I learned a lot from him. And one of the things he always said was that the first responsibility of a leader is the creation of meaning. And in that creation of meaning, you have to tell stories, because human beings learn through stories. And if you want to be a super powerful leader that can really gather people around you, you'll, what I call, clang your cymbals. You will recognize the power of symbolic thinking and giving people metaphors and concepts that they can use. I told it's a very simple very simple example that I was in a meeting with a number of my colleagues, and we were rehashing a number of problems, but somehow couldn't come up with a solution. And finally, one woman in the group took out a bag of smooth rocks or marbles. I can't remember which. And she said to everybody, take one. And we did. And she said, that is your touchstone. That is your touchstone. That is your touchstone for the mission. So with that in mind and that in your hand, what's our solution? Mm-hmm. And it was like magic. In 15 minutes, we were able to coalesce around a solution because we had that symbol it called us back to why we were there, what our mission was, as opposed to, well, I think this and I think that. And, it was just having that symbol to coalesce around helps people in a group to work together toward the common good.
My guest is practivist Gloria Feldt. Her book is called Intentioning: Sex, Power, Pandemics, and How Women Will Take the Lead for Everyone's Good. We'll be back with more of Gloria after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Look out, world, we're getting strong. The future's here and we belong. She can STEM, she can do more. Like build a rocket and watch it soar. Or clean the oceans and make the world a better place. Oh, she can STEM, so can you. Find a cure, invent something new. There's no challenge in the world that she can't face. She can STEM.
Learn more at She Can STEM. A message brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes magazine's flagship radio show, What Is Going On. My passion is sifting through information, research and innovations from New Thought teachers, speakers and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that we can give our daughters everything they need to grow and learn, but not every child can focus on classes and play dates.
Nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. face hunger. That's 1 in 6. School lunch might be their only meal each day, and it's heartbreaking to imagine any child going to bed hungry. We're dreaming of a perfect day when kids can smile, play, and just be kids without worrying about where their next meal will come from. Feeding America is working to make that perfect day a reality.
Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste. That food is given to families and children in need. Being a kid should be about doing things that make an ordinary day extraordinary. Learning to play an instrument, building a sandcastle, hosting tea parties. Hunger should never be an obstacle to growing up.
You can help end childhood hunger in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week, Gloria Feldt. Her book is Intentioning: Sex, Power, Pandemics, and How Women Will Take the Lead for Everyone's Good. So we talked about all the methods that you've come up, the 9 methods. I have a question concerning the recent egregious laws passed in Texas and Mississippi, the ones that are aimed at restricting a woman's constitutional right to abortion. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, as a great big question, Victor, I wrote a book a few years ago called The War on Choice, the right-wing attack on women's rights and how to fight back. And I think people got the what the attacks were all about, but didn't quite read the part where I said, and this is what you do about it, in my usual practivist sort of way. And I think a couple of things. One is that Roe has been pretty useless, has been toothless for many years. But what I think most people don't realize is that the right to make reproductive choices is much bigger than the right to abortion. And the first court case that was decided based on the right to privacy, which is what Roe is based on, is Griswold versus Connecticut, which gave us the right to birth control, which had been illegal since 1873. Mm-hmm. And was still illegal in many states. It was finally the last vestiges of the Comstock laws that made birth control illegal were still on the books until I think the 80s. So and also that most of the gay rights cases have been based on that same jurisprudence. I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg was right when she said that it's unfortunate that Griswold and Roe were based on a right to privacy, which is actually not written in the Constitution. It is what they call a penumbra. It's an assumption that the Constitution gives us the ability to make these personal decisions. And that we would have been better off if these cases had been decided based on the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, that would make it a civil right. That would be a much stronger legal basis. So in truth, Roe has been toothless and useless for a number of years. So I think it wouldn't surprise me if Roe is overturned, or if it becomes such a shell that it's, again, everybody will understand it's not really going to protect anything. I believe that until women have equal power, equal positions in leadership, and equal pay, that we will keep fighting those same battles over and over and over again. And yes, I spent a good bit of my professional career fighting them, but I also realized fairly early on that if you argue on somebody else's terms, you're going to lose every single time. And you need to set the terms of the debate yourself. So for me, the terms of the debate are around women's human and civil right to make our own decisions about childbearing and have the autonomy over our bodies that men have. It's not an additional right. It's a human right that men already have because we're simply constructed a little differently. And I believe very strongly that that's the direction that we need to go in order to that we may eventually stop fighting on that same old battleground that is very stale. I think it's clear that there are some in our society who like to use that issue to take the focus off of some other things they're doing, like voter suppression, for example. And it works, unfortunately. I mean, people get really exercised about it. And, there can always be different opinions about public policy, but when the public policy opinions come down to that and are in fact opinions based on our different respective religious points of view or our value systems, that's when it's important to let the individual make those kinds of decisions themselves. So we need to pass the Freedom of Choice Act, which would codify reproductive rights as a civil right. We need to pass the Equal Rights Amendment for once and for all, and we need to pass equal pay legislation that's been languishing in Congress for some years. So if we do that, I think we will not have to worry so much about those states that are trying to limit reproductive rights and health and justice.
You've set a goal for full leadership gender parity by 2025. Why that year, and is it doable?
So, the most optimistic prediction for the United States for gender parity leadership was 70 years when I started writing No Excuses 10 years ago. And it's not much better now because the pandemic has set women back, although we had been making really good progress. But the pandemic has definitely set women back. And the World Economic Forum says it may be 150 to 300 years. But the truth of the matter is, if I could live 70 or 150 years more, I would be happy to do that. The odds are not great. So I figure I want to see this in my lifetime. So let's do it by 2025. And I believe we can, because just, when the pandemic started, we had gone from 18% to 25%. And I believe that it's a lot easier to double from 25 to 50% than it is to go incrementally from 1 to 25. So given what I said about the fact that now we have the benefit of the disruption of the pandemic, I think we can make change further, faster. And that surprises people when I say that. But I'll tell you, I was on a corporate roundtable discussion to this very day, and I heard company after company after company say they're going to have flex time from now on. They're going to have different ways to enable people to work from home part of the time and work in the office part of the time. They're going to have more mental health day leave. They're going to have more flexibility for people who have to be taking care of the elderly or the children in the family. I'm like, I can't believe I'm hearing this from corporate executives. And I asked the question, is this just like a temporary thing because of the pandemic, or do you see this as being long-term change? And they all said, this is fundamental change. This is long-term change, because everybody now knows you can be just as productive and give people that flexibility so they can take care of their families and get their work done. So it's like, new ideas can go into the system. And right now in Congress, they're talking about childcare as infrastructure. Never in my lifetime did I think I would hear those two words in the same sentence. And yet there we are. It's understood that it's not, it's as important as roads or bridges, that our children can get cared for properly. And companies have invested so much in women, female employees, that they can't afford for women not to come back to work. So I think we can do it. I think we can do it in spite of it all.
The magic question: how may those of my gender take an active part in gender equality?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. And really, a lot of men, and an increasing number of men, are much more openly interested in helping women reach parity. That's not all a beautiful picture, but I always say, whenever I make a speech, that there's always the question, well, what about the men? So I wrote a chapter called "What About the Men?" And I shout out quite a number of men, and I could have shouted out many more men who are actively engaged in helping gender parity happen sooner than later. Often it's because they have daughters, but it's also because, again, when we look back to 300 years ago, it was rare for there to be a 2-person breadwinner family. But now that's more the norm, that if there's a couple, they're probably both breadwinners. And if it's a single person, which there are more and more of, that person, which is usually a woman, is going to be the breadwinner. And so when I teach this as an academic course, I usually have about 25% men, and when they first come in, they think that it was just going to be an easy 3-hour course that they took, so they weren't going to pay that much attention to it. But pretty soon they get really interested in the fact that, hey, wait a minute, if my wife or my girlfriend is making 20 cents less on the dollar than I am, that impacts my family finances. It's not just that it's wrong. It's not just that it's not just, but that affects me. That affects my, what I might want to buy next year, or our ability to buy a new house, or whatever it might be. So it gets personal. It has to be personal. And I think generally it's men who have a personal reason, who have a personal investment in some way because of a family member or because they have daughters, who become much more committed to women's advancement. But there are more and more men. And you know what? I think that men have been put into a box just like women have. And, men have been expected to be always strong, to be always the breadwinner for the family. And that's a tough box to be in. That's a heavy responsibility. So, and we see more men today who want to be part of their children's lives. So all of these factors are at play. And there is the old, there is still some backlash. And look, people don't relinquish power easily. They don't relinquish power gracefully sometimes. We see that in the news every day. They don't relinquish power easily, but the trend line is in the direction of a much more equal world.
Her book is called Intentioning: Sex, Power, Pandemics, and How Women Will Take the Lead for Everyone's Good. Gloria Feldt, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Thank you. You can get my book at any of your favorite booksellers, online or in stores. You can also find out more about it and where you can get it. And you get direct links to those bookstores on my website, gloriafeldt.com/intentioning. And if you go to that page, you can download a free workbook that goes along with the book and helps you to utilize all of the leadership tools in it. And I would love for you to connect with me on social media. Victor, I am a social media fiend. I spend too much time on social media, and I really love hearing what people have to say, and I love for them to connect with me. So I am at Gloria Feldt everywhere.
Wonderful. Gloria, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom and your practivism.
It's been my pleasure, Victor, and thank you for giving me a whole other new word.
There you go. And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.